A tragedy struck in the deep waters of the Barents Sea. At 11:28 a.m. on the August 12th of 2000, 118 men disappeared beneath the freezing Arctic waters. Only 23 of them survived the first minutes, and one of them, in total darkness, wrote a note that would go down as one of the most heartbreaking moments in the naval history. This is the story of the Kursk, the submarine Russia believed was unstoppable. The Kursk was one of the strongest submarines Russia had ever built. A double-hulled titan, engineered not only to fight a war, but for dominance. Commanders believed she could survive a direct torpedo hit and walk away from any battle. So in August of 2000, she was chosen to be the heart of a massive naval exercise. On board were 118 sailors, including some of the finest men Russian Navy had ever trained. For them, this wasn't just another deployment, it was an honor, a chance to prove themselves in front of the newly elected president Vladimir Putin. The exercise was simple: fire a torpedo at a dummy target. And inside the control room, everything appeared to be routine. Inside the torpedo compartment, everything was normal. But as the Kursk descended deeper into the Barents Sea, a violent explosion shook the submarine. Immediately, the lights snapped out, and the steel giant was swallowed by darkness. Before the crew could understand what happened, a second explosion tore through the forward compartment of the submarine, killing almost all the men instantly. But 23 of them had survived, trapped in the ninth compartment, injured, freezing, with oxygen fading minute by minute. Among them was Lieutenant Captain Dmitry Kolesnikov, a disciplined officer in his mid-30s. Realizing that time was running out and water was flooding in, he reached out for a pen, and in the darkness, he wrote a note that would outlive them all. All the crew from 6th, 7th and 8th compartments moved to the 9th. There are 23 of us here. We feel bad from the effects of carbon monoxide. The pressure is increasing in here. None of us can get to the surface. Don't despair. The 23 men had waited, hoping for a rescue that never came. When the rescuers finally arrived, 7 days had already passed. British and Norwegian divers searched the black waters until they found the wreck of the Kursk. The hull was completely destroyed, twisted metal scorched from the inside. A clear evidence of the violent internal blasts. They knocked onto the escape hatch, hoping that the men were still alive. They received nothing but silence. When they opened it, they found what the world had feared the most. All the 118 men inside were gone. But why did it take 7 days for the help to arrive? And what exactly happened on board the Kursk? The answers reveal a chain of mistakes, secrecy, and decisions that turned a survivable disaster into an unspeakable tragedy. To Russia, everything appeared normal on the surface. Kursk had missed a few communication checks, but during torpedo drills, silence was a routine. Nothing seemed unusual, at least not yet. But by late afternoon, Kursk had missed every communication window, and soon afterwards, a report came in which stated that the seismic stations in Norway and Russia recorded 2 underwater explosions. The second was massive and equivalent to several tons of TNT. Its shockwaves rippled across the entirety of the Barents Sea. That's when the Russian Navy issued a fleet-wide alert. The surface ships swept across the entirety of the sea for any signs of debris or oil slick. But they found nothing, and the most troubling sign of all was that the emergency buoy that was designed to surface automatically from the Kursk in the case of a disaster never appeared. The silence left the officials confused and the families terrified. By nightfall, the pressure in Kremlin was erupting. Families had gathered desperate for answers. Commanders claimed everything was under control and the Kursk was undergoing some minor technical difficulties, but privately they feared the worst. Then a decisive sonar reading came through which stated that the Kursk had been found at the depth of 108 meters, resting at the bottom of the Barents Sea. US and NATO immediately offered help, including specialized rescue teams that were ready to be deployed. But Russia refused. Sharing submarine technology with foreign nations such as US and NATO was unthinkable for them. So, secrecy outweighed the shrinking window of survival. The next morning, Russia launched its own rescue attempts using a breeze, a deep submergence rescue vehicle. But problems began instantly. Current pushed it off course. Its docking seals failed, and the breeze's batteries drained rapidly. It was old, underpowered, and never designed for a disaster like this. As the storms rolled in, another attempt failed. Hours slipped away as the 23 men who survived the explosions waited in darkness. Under the mounting pressure, Russia finally accepted the foreign help. But by the time British and Norwegian divers had arrived, 7 days had passed. Yes, 7 days. That's how long the world watched helplessly as rescue attempts failed again and again. 7 days in which the men inside the Kursk might still have been alive. And with that rescue over, one haunting question remained. What caused the explosions that sent the Kursk to the bottom of the sea? To understand that, we must first learn the structure of the Kursk. She was built at the time of Cold War rivalry in the St. Pat shipyard under the vision of Admiral Sergei Gorskov, the father of the modern Soviet Navy. The Kursk was massive. She was double-hulled and able to withstand crushing pressures, a fortress designed to survive the unthinkable. And inside that armored shell lay 9 sealed compartments. She was 154 meters long, nearly the length of 2 Boeing 747s placed nose to tail. The Kursk was a giant of the deep. Weighing over 18,000 tons and driven by twin nuclear reactors, she was a machine not just built for war but for dominance. But the main issue was with the torpedoes that the Kursk carried. When the investigators finally reached the wreck, the devastation was unmistakable. The bow where the torpedo room once was had been obliterated. Steel was peeled back like a paper, and bulkheads twisted and scorched from the inside. First, Russia blamed the collision. Some claimed the foreign submarine was involved, but the evidence told another story. Inside the wreckage, analysts found traces of hydrogen peroxide used in the Kursk's practice torpedoes. These torpedoes were notoriously unstable, safe when stored properly, but dangerously reactive when exposed to heat, contaminants, or corrosion. Somewhere inside the torpedo, a small leak may have met the copper components of the casing of the submarine. The reaction was instant, resulting in a flash fire followed by an explosion that ruptured the first compartment. The lights might have went out immediately, which killed the systems. As a result, the submarine plunged into darkness. Then came the real catastrophe. The heat from the first explosion ignited the warheads of the torpedoes, creating a chain reaction equal to nearly several tons of TNT. The shockwave tore through the compartment, killing almost all the crew instantly. Only the men in the ninth compartment survived those first horrific seconds. For years, the Russian Navy denied this explanation. They wanted to hide that they had kept unstable, decades-old torpedoes in service, but the scorch marks, residues, and structural damage proved otherwise. It wasn't a collision, it wasn't a foreign attack. It was an internal malfunction, preventable and deadly. The Kursk was finally brought up from the Barents Sea, one of the largest submarine salvage operations in the world. The note written by Kolesnikov was found. It was then proved that 23 men were still alive in the submarine. In the end, no theory, be it official or otherwise, changes the outcome. Kursk now rests in history as one of the worst peacetime naval disasters ever recorded. The sailors aboard never resurfaced, and the full truth of what happened in those final minutes may never be known. What is certain is that for days after the explosion, hope slowly faded across the Barents Sea, eroded by silence, secrecy, and unforgiving depths. And even now, decades later, the final moments of the Kursk remain locked behind steel, politics, cold waters of the Arctic. A tragedy unanswered and unforgettable.